and welcome back to Underdog Investing. Today I'd like to go through the Q4 2020 earnings report by CRISPR Therapeutics. Firstly, going through some good news from the earnings report, and then I'd like to talk about the financials, and then I'd like to talk a bit about the treatments that they're offering, which are currently undergoing clinical trials. And finally, I'd like to talk about the stock price and what I'm planning to do with the stock. And before I jump into the video, I'll be very grateful if you can smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for future updates. So starting with some pieces of good news. The first one is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So in December 2020, CRISPR Therapeutics announced the receipt of a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to research in vivo gene editing therapies for the treatment of HIV. So that's the first piece of good news. The second piece of good news is the fact that the co-founder, who is Professor Emmanuelle Charpentier, in October 2020, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for her groundbreaking work on the CRISPR-Cas9 system. So this is amazing. The fact that the co-founder of CRISPR Therapeutics is a Nobel Prize winner, and the thing that she won the Nobel Prize on is the very technology that CRISPR Therapeutics are using in their company, which is the CRISPR-Cas9 system. So that's just incredible news. The third piece of good news is in April 2020, CRISPR Therapeutics announced that under its June 2019 collaboration agreement with Vertex to discover and develop gene editing therapies for the treatment of Duchenne muscular dystrophy and myotonic dystrophy type 1. CRISPR Therapeutics received a payment of $25 million from Vertex related to the achievement of research milestones in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy program. And even better news is that there are actual additional milestone payments. So if they hit these milestones, they could actually get up to $800 million for these two programs. So that's some really good news. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is just so I think what muscular dystrophy means is muscle wasting, and Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a genetic condition which results in muscle wasting. So it normally affects children, obviously due to the genetic nature of the disease. So that's the good news. And I'd like to run through some of the financials now. So starting with the revenue, not so great. So the total collaboration revenue was $0.2 million for the fourth quarter of 2020 compared to $77 million in the fourth quarter of 2019 and $0.5 million for 2020 in a whole compared to $289 million for 2019 as a whole. So this decrease in revenue is attributable to revenue recognized in connection with the sale of certain licenses under the company's collaboration with Vertex during the year of 2019. So a similar story with the net income and loss. So we lost more money in 2020. And I think the reason is because genomics is actually such a new field, and it's very exciting when good things happen, but obviously it takes time in terms of clinical trials, and like Kathy Wood from ARK Invest says, it really is a long-term play because so much can happen in the short term. But what we're hoping is that the fact that genomic technology is actually improving exponentially. So hopefully in the future we're going to see a lot more progress in terms of the speed at which clinical trials are successful, because that really is where the money is made. Is when clinical trials are successful, we're able to actually use these technologies to improve patients' lives, and that results in revenue, and increased revenue obviously increases the stock price. So we really do have to have a long-term outlook and try to ignore the short-term figures. Some good news though in terms of financials is their cash position. Their cash position actually increased from 2019, where they had $943 million to $1.7 billion as of 2020. So that's a significant increase in the cash position. And the main reason is it was driven by financing activities of about $1 billion, which consists primarily of proceeds from the company's July public offering and funds received from its at-the-market offering during 2020. So they're in a very solid position in terms of capital. And the reason why that's important is due to the fact that they need a lot of money for research and development. As we can see here, they spent almost double the amount that they did in 2019 on research and development, and that's a good thing. So they spent $82 million just in the fourth quarter alone of 2020. Compare that to $48 million in the fourth quarter of 2019. And if you look at the whole year, we spent about $266 million in research and development versus $180 million in 2019. So the increase in expenses is due to the research and development into hemoglobinopathies, which are basically diseases of the blood cells, and then also immuno-oncology programs, so things like immune diseases as well as cancers. So that, I think the cash position is good, research and development is going well, so not too much to say there. And then I'd like to talk a bit about some of the treatments that they are currently undergoing clinical trials now. So starting with CTX001. So CTX001 is an investigational autologous ex vivo CRISPR-Cas9 gene-edited therapy that is being evaluated for patients suffering from transfusion-dependent thalassemia or severe sickle cell disease. Now that sounds quite complicated, but I'll try and break it down. It was a bit confusing for me. So the way I see it is, first of all, so sickle cell disease. If we have a look at these two diagrams of cross-sections of blood vessels, if you have a look at a normal blood vessel, and these are normal red blood cells within the blood vessel, they're kind of like cup-shaped, and they fit nicely in the blood vessel, so it flows nicely. But then in someone with sickle cell disease, the normal cup shape changes and it turns into these sickle-shaped red blood cells. And what happens with these sickle shapes is it doesn't really flow through the blood vessels properly, and that results in some clogging of blood vessels. And the symptoms that you get range from very mild symptoms to very severe symptoms. And usually the severe symptoms, they call it crises, and it leads to severe pain and other complications as well. So that's what I see sickle cell disease as. And thalassemia is quite similar in that there's a problem with the red blood cells, because you have reduced number of red blood cells, and you also have abnormally shaped red blood cells. But anyway, what CTX001 is doing is it's basically using the CRISPR-Cas9 technology to take a patient's hematopoietic stem cells, which are basically very early stem cells. So these are early blood cells which can turn into various different types of blood cells, like red blood cells, white blood cells. But they take these blood cells and they basically engineer it in a way that they produce something called fetal hemoglobin. And fetal hemoglobin is normally seen in babies, and with adults we usually grow out of it. But it's very useful because they're very good at carrying oxygen. And with this engineering and the ability to make adults create fetal hemoglobin, what that actually does for patients like transfusion-dependent thalassemia and sickle cell disease is it actually improves their... So for example here they say, so CTX001 has the potential to alleviate transfusion requirements for transfusion-dependent thalassemia patients. Because if you imagine patients with thalassemia, they're going to be anemic all the time, so they're going to require, some of them are going to require regular transfusions. And if we have this treatment where we give them basically the ability to produce fetal hemoglobin, that results in them not having to have transfusions. So that's a significant positive impact in their lives. And it can also impact sickle cell disease patients by reducing painful and debilitating sickle cell crises. So yeah, I found that quite complicated, but I don't know if my explanation helped. That's how I like to think about it. And then they've got loads of other treatments. So for example, the CTX110, which is still in phase 1 of clinical trials, and it is basically a CAR-T therapy. So what that stands for is chimeric antigen receptor T cell, and T cell is an immune cell. And what happens is we basically take out the immune cells from a patient, and we again engineer it using the CRISPR technology, and that once we've engineered it, we put it back into the patient, and what happens is this T cell is now able to possibly detect cancer cells, as well as possibly destroy the cancer cells as well. So it's very, very exciting technology. And for this particular one, CTX110, it is targeting B cell cancers, so immune type of cell cancer. The other thing to point out is they say allogenic here. So allogenic basically means we take the T cells from a patient and we engineer it, and then we put it into a different patient who requires the treatment. But yeah, so still in phase 1, and I think the CTX001 is also still in phase 1. CTX1220, you've got other things like this, which basically again in phase 1 of clinical trials. It is another CAR-T, allogenic again, and it is targeting things like multiple myeloma, so another blood cancer. And then we've got CTX130, again a similar thing, so allogenic CAR-T therapy. This one is targeting solid tumours and hematologic malignancies. So tumours and malignancies, they both basically mean cancer, and so you've got solid ones versus blood cancers. In terms of solid, we've got renal cell carcinoma, so kidney cancer, and then we've got T and B cell hematologic malignancies, so these are the immune cancers. And again, I think, so this one is in phase 1 as well. So they're all in phase 1 clinical trials, so very early on, but it's very exciting technology. And just to give you an idea, so phase 1 is the earliest phase, in which we're evaluating safety, determining the safe dosage, and identifying side effects. And then we move on to things like phase 2, 3, and 4. So yes, what I can say about this is, actually, let's go on to the stock price first. So as we can see, the stock price today, which is Wednesday the 24th of February, is about $133. And we've had a significant pullback. So over the past month, we've dropped about 26%. And if we have a look at the 6-month chart, we actually reached a high of about $210 on the 14th of January. So about a month and a bit ago. And we've actually pulled back about 36%. That's a very significant pullback, and you can see that we've also had a massive run up over the past 6 months, so up to a high of about 136%, and then down, but we're still up about 50%. So as you can see here, it's a very volatile stock, and the reason is because genomics is such an exciting and early industry for us to get into. That was demonstrated by the variability in the revenues between 2019 and 2020. We really do rely on successful clinical trials for the company to make revenue, and therefore for the stock price to go up. And at the moment, obviously, because the technology is so new, it does take a lot longer. But what ARK Invest and as well as Kathy Wood are saying is basically that genomic technology is improving and advancing at such an exponential rate that they believe that within the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see genetic technologies being successful in terms of clinical trials much faster than they are at the moment, and that's going to lead to drastic improvement in terms of impact on patients as well as revenues, and therefore we could potentially see these stock prices dramatically skyrocket. But in terms of the short term, it's very difficult to predict. As you can see, we've had massive run-ups, massive pullbacks, so it still is very volatile. But what I would say is it's a very good buying opportunity at the moment, and I personally will be buying more shares of CRISPR Technologies at these prices. And then finally, I just want to finish off with a quote. So the single greatest edge an investor can have is a long-term orientation. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.